Welcome everybody to the Caregiver Coffee Hour. With us today we have Dexter Peggins from the Recovery Care Program's Peer Support Coordination Program that supports caregivers across the country. Dexter's been with the program since about 2014 and is going to share a short presentation with us to cover some of the details and resources that are available to you caregivers. And once he wraps that up, we'll have some time for some Q&A and discussion. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Dexter.
Hey, thank you, Kelly. I want to say thank you for having me on this wonderful day and this great occasion. I'm going to pull up my slides really quickly and we'll get started. All right. So as Kelly mentioned, I will be discussing our caregiver support program. One of the great programs that we offer as a part of the Recovery Care Program. So first thing first, here's a few objectives that I'm going to try to get accomplished in this briefing. We're going to quickly discuss the significance of the military caregiver program, why it is such a concern on the national level. We're going to describe our military caregiver forms, and then we're going to also identify some available resources that are available for our military caregivers. And so let's start at the origins of our specific program. Several years ago, the RAND organization, the RAND Corporation, they conducted a comprehensive study that identified a severely overlooked population of our military community. And that population happened to be the military caregiver. This study revealed that an estimated 5.5 million military caregivers were actually in the United States. And of these 5.5 million, 1 million were caring for our post 9/11 veterans. And so here's some of the significant things that were found during that particular study. A lot of our military caregivers, they identified them as being younger. They were caring for a younger individual with mental health issues, substance abuse issues, and oftentimes these caregivers were found to be lacking the support systems that maybe your older generation spouses were afforded. Many of our military caregivers, they experienced worse health outcomes, greater strains in family relationships, and more workplace problems than your non-caregiver. Essentially, our post 9/11 military caregivers were found to fare worse in a number of areas that had not been identified with previous groups of spouses. And so long story short, from this study, this particular program was launched to begin to provide assistance for those caregivers who had not found that support group that they desperately needed. So out of that, we launched what was called the Military Peer Support Forums. The peer program essentially is our personalized experiences, engagement, and resources. And so that's where the acronym for my particular role and position comes from. And here's what we provide in these forums. First thing first, the forums serve as a place for our caregivers who have these unique experiences to come together with other caregivers and find that sense of community. At the end of the day, what we understand is that community is important, and you want to be able to hear the voice of somebody who can relate to your given situation. And so that is one of the predominant things and one of the predominant reasons that we've found great success with our particular forums. These forums are based on real life experiences. And as mentioned in the first bullet, they're delivered by other caregivers. Long story short, we serve to facilitate the conversation, but the conversation is held amongst caregivers themselves. Just a quick overview of one of our resources, the Military Family Life Counselor. In many cases, our military family life counselors, they're embedded throughout the installation in various units, but they are a great resource to not only the service member, but also to the family and the caregiver. What they do is they provide face-to-face non-medical counseling and briefings on and off installations to service members and their family members. They are educated, they possess a master's or in many cases, doctorate level degrees in mental health, and they're licensed and certified in their given state. And once again, they can be found throughout your installation. So if the caregiver is unfamiliar with the family life counselor, I want to strongly encourage you to make that contact because they are indeed a great resource. So let's talk about the peer support coordinator. I myself am a peer support coordinator along with 9 other of my colleagues, and we cover the whole CONUS, the whole continental United States, to include Puerto Rico. And so we are dispersed throughout all geographical regions. We assist with convening the military peer forums. We conduct outreach activities, identify and report gaps in support. And here's why it's really significant and important for those relationships with the caregivers for us to make that contact. The issues that the caregiver informs us that they might be having, what we do is we actually provide that information up to our leadership. We provide it all the way up to the leadership of the Defense Health Agency. And from there, we have protocols and policies that are created that actually open the door for other resources to be provided to the caregiver, which is why it's critical for the referrals of the caregivers to be made to peer support coordinators. And these are some of the benefits that are associated with making that contact and the benefits associated with peer support coordinators assisting your caregivers. Ultimately, at the end of the day, what we do is we serve as a liaison to connect the caregiver with those resources. And by doing so, the caregiver is now in a better position to serve their wounded, ill, and injured loved one. And so, as I mentioned earlier, we do cover the CONUS United States. I myself have the great honor and privilege of serving in the Southeast region. I cover Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, Florida, and even Puerto Rico. But long story short, there is a representative to service whatever state, whatever city that you live in. And at the end of this presentation, the contact information for your peer support coordinator will be provided to you. So let's talk about some ways that we can support military caregivers. First and foremost, and I believe one of the most important things that we can do is to remember that we are to serve as a listening ear. We don't come in offering advice from the standpoint of expertise, because at the end of the day, only that caregiver knows the depth of the issues that they're experiencing. But in serving as a listening ear, we want to first and foremost examine and make sure that there's no warning signs of extreme stress, depression, mental and physical fatigue, and also neglect in the area of self-care. In doing this, what we can also do is begin to connect that caregiver with resources that will help them improve their quality of life. And oftentimes we miss those opportunities because we're quickly trying to throw a solution at a problem that we not specifically identify because we're not giving them the space to talk. So once again, we want to provide ongoing support by being that effective listener. And from that space, we want to begin to help that caregiver improve their quality of life by connecting them with available resources. So here are some of those available resources, as I mentioned earlier, and we'll go into a little bit more depth here shortly. We have the Military Caregiver Virtual Peer Forum. We have the Caregiver Resource Directory, Military Caregiver Webinars, our Warrior Care blog, and VA Caregiver website. So let's talk about the Virtual Peer Forum. The virtual peer forum, we hold that on a bi-monthly basis. So twice a month, caregivers from across the country are getting together and they're providing resource support for one another. They're becoming that virtual community of support. In doing so, we've actually been doing the virtual peer forum for a significant amount of time. We've been doing it for several years now. And so even in our current global situation with many people being quarantined due to the COVID crisis, we've already been doing the virtual meetings. And so it really aligns with the current times that we live in. And we believe that caregivers will find this resource to be extremely beneficial. And so here's the information as it relates to reserving your spot for those forums. Everybody's vetted. We're not just letting anyone on the particular forum, but this is once again specifically for the caregiver. And so caregivers who are interested in participating in the virtual forum just need to send an email to osd.caregiver@mail.mil. The Caregiver Resource Directory is a great resource for not only caregivers, but really anybody connected in the military, anybody who's a veteran, anybody who is once again works in the space as a VSO or any organization. I cannot brag on this resource enough, but what you have inside of this resource directory are hundreds of resources that are available for the caregiver. Anything as it relates to helplines, down to supporting children's needs, you can literally find that in this resource directory. One of the things that people often ask us as peer support coordinators, what are the areas of emphasis that we commonly see as it relates to caregiver needs? And we're talking about anything from employment to education to mental health. Literally, all of these things can be found inside of the Caregiver Resource Directory. And so the actual online version of this product can be found on our website. And once again, that information will be provided at the end of this presentation. And here's just a little background about our military caregiver webinars. The webinar topics are generated by military caregivers through the military peer and virtual peer forums. Essentially, as I stated earlier, the caregivers, they drive the forums. And so it's not someone getting on there saying, hey, this is what we're going to talk about. You need to talk about this month. No, it's literally caregivers saying, hey, you know, my husband, my wife is dealing with PTSD, and as a caregiver, I can use some support. And in considering those type of comments and suggestions, what'll happen is an expert in that space will provide a detailed conversation concerning that specific issue, allowing caregivers to, one, understand and know that they've been heard, but then two, provide them with practical skills to overcome those issues. As I mentioned earlier, the Warrior Care blog, another great resource which can be found on our website. And the website is listed below at warriorcare.dodlive.mil/caregiver resources. The VA Caregiver Support Program. Now, want to clarify and make it understood that we are not VA caregiver facilitators. We are not the VA caregiver program. We actually provide services for our DoD caregivers, for our active duty caregivers. However, we do have relationships with our VA caregiver coordinators. Even in the Southeast region, I know the VA caregivers within my region, and I have a relationship with them. So what we oftentimes do is we serve as the bridge connecting transitioning caregivers with our VA counterparts. And so just to alleviate any confusion, once again, the peer support program is for active duty, the reserve and guard population. However, we can serve to assist the transitioning caregiver to make contact with with the VA caregiver program, and also help them prepare for any paperwork or any outstanding questions that they may have as it relates to the particular VA caregiver program. And so here are just a few points of contact. Our director is Miss Sandra Mason. Our program manager is Artisha Ortiz. And then, as I stated earlier, I service Region 2, which is the Southeast region. However, if you are unable to locate or contact the caregiver peer support coordinator who services your area, please feel free to reach out to me, and I will definitely point you in the right direction. At this time, I want to open up the floor for any questions.
It's Kelly. I just want to first off give you a huge thank you, not only for taking your time to do this today, but also to you and your colleagues for just doing what you do. Those of us within the MASP program that run events know that while we're running it for RSMs, we also have the privilege of meeting their caregivers quite often, and they are part of the family. And it's wonderful to know that we always want to be able to support them any way we can, and to know that there is this option for them, this great resource across the country, no matter where we are, and all that you provide is fantastic. So thank you from the bottom of our hearts. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly, for having me.
Of course. Before I jump into question, go ahead, Gabby.
Oh, sorry. I was just gonna ask quickly about the blog that you were talking about. Now, you had mentioned the word forum. Is it like a live blog forum, or is it something where they send in a question and it like gets sent to an email and someone responds to it?
Yes, Gabby, great question. So the actual blog is responsive from the standpoint of someone actually vets the question and they will respond. So it's not real time, but it is pretty quick turnaround as far as the engagement.
LJ or Roger, do you guys have any questions for Dexter?
Dexter, I do have a question, and again, I just reiterate Kelly's thoughts a moment ago about what you guys do and how important it is. We have the privilege of working with the active duty, but as a military dependent growing up, I certainly understand the role of dependents in the household with regular service, much less with any difficulties that can arise. But so thank you very much for what you do in helping out the entire scope of things. Given 2020 and how it's gone with COVID and quarantine, your resources, has the peer program expanded greatly, the virtual programs available, or could you speak to additional areas that you've addressed with caregivers with response to quarantining and the whole COVID 2020?
Yeah, great question. So definitely the virtual space has expanded. As I mentioned in the presentation, we were already doing the virtual. And so it just, unfortunately, it seems like this current climate is more conducive for virtual engagement. And so we've been consistent in our numbers. However, the opportunity to grow is there. And so that's why it's important for not only our programs, but for other stakeholders to be aware of not only what we're providing, but also the necessity to make the invitation available for caregivers. One of the challenges, and I'm going to tie it back into your question, but one of the challenges that we've experienced on a pretty significant amount of time is that most caregivers don't identify as caregivers. You know, when a husband and a wife get married, they see each other as spouses. You know, so the taking on the identifier of a caregiver is foreign. And so when you're talking about maybe your marital vows of, for better or worse, till death do us part, they just assume that, the hardship associated with maybe their spouse getting hurt or their spouse being sick comes with the role of being a spouse. It's not labeled or it's not connected with this new title of caregiver. And so what happens when we fail to introduce the language of caregiver, those resources that they could benefit from, they're not aware of them and they miss out on them. And so going back to your question, the opportunity to continue to touch caregivers is always necessary, which is why we are dependent upon the referral process. Once again, in this virtual space, there's nothing but opportunities for caregivers to really get what they need. And I believe that a number of our veteran service organizations, to include a number of other help agencies, they have made the adjustment. It's just the challenge is the caregiver who does not know that they are a caregiver are unaware of those resources.
I've never thought about that. That is an excellent point. You're right, to shift gears into those roles. And if they don't think that way, they're not exploring those options. To kind of just tack onto that, I was wondering, just practically speaking, so you cover a very large area. So just what is an example? Do you have like a particular example? I don't mean to put you on the spot of a caregiver that contacted you, needed something, you pointed them in the direction. So what types of needs do the caregivers have and resource did you provide them?
Definitely. I do have a large region.
Yes.
But all of us do. And we enjoy it and we're extremely appreciative of the opportunity to do it, and we love what we do. One example that I had of a caregiver was an educational need. The caregiver was actually taking care of their mother, who was a active duty colonel transitioning because they had a series of strokes. They wanted to become a nurse. They literally shifted gears from being a realtor, and now they express interest in how could they better take care of their mother, as well as explore a career field. And so they relocated to Alabama. I'm trying to think of the city, but UAB had a program, a nursing program. And so one of the things they reached out to me was, as far as education, were there any scholarship opportunities or anything to that degree? And so we were able to identify a number of resources that they could take advantage of. And I believe that we're still, they haven't solidified that decision, but something like that. I'll tell you another big one is respite care. When a person who becomes totally dependent upon you to take them to all of their appointments, that really changes up your day-to-day life. Oftentimes we overlook the need for personal time. And so imagine when someone else is relying upon you for literally everything. You need a break. And so there have been people who've reached out to me on a number of occasions saying, hey, is there anybody who's able to come and sit with my caregiver just for a few hours? And one of the things I'll do is, based upon the location, I'll call around, I'll find a respite organization, verify that either A, they take TRICARE, or B, what are the methods of payment that they're willing to accept? Do they accept insurance? And based upon having had the conversation with the caregiver, I already know their expectations. If this organization is able to meet that expectation, then we just pair them up together and let it go from there.
That's incredible. That is a great example, because absolutely right. Everybody needs that respite, and that's a hard thing to lock on, actually. And especially if you don't have time to do even you know, the slightest bit of like, you know, personal self-care or whatever, you know, taking the time to actually field all those resources, you take that off their plate. It's a great point.
Yeah, thank you, Kelly.
I guess I didn't realize how vast the services were. I guess I had this vision of, you know, you support caregivers supporting service members, but I didn't realize like how much you actually support just the caregiver themselves. I know that a caregiver of ours recently tapped into some caregiver services that they're very appreciative for, because they have a service member, or they had a service member at home that just needed full-time care, like literally could not go to the bathroom by himself. And so even going to pick up her kids from school, she had someone come in for that hour just so she could go get them, because taking him out of the house was just, you know, it was a 3-hour activity that they had to endure.
Definitely, Gabrielle, and I'm glad that you were able to say that, because, you know, that's just one of those things that people overlook. It might not be your personal experience, but it is happening for somebody, you know, and it's happening to somebody. And so if we can get the word out as it relates to this particular program, we can begin to alleviate some of those concerns that our caregivers are now taking responsibility for.
Roger, did you have any questions?
I was kind of curious how the virtual caregiver peer forums went. Just trying to imagine what that looks like. Could you sort of describe how many people and a sort of a typical you know, virtual peer support forum in general?
Yeah. So as I mentioned in the slides, the process is that they will RSVP, and then on the when we say vetted, they would be identified as a caregiver, because you don't want the space to be flooded with, you know, a lot of people who the program doesn't apply to, you know, who will overtake the conversation. And so on average, we're looking at anywhere between 5 to 10 caregivers on a virtual call. And then you'll have either a peer support coordinator or somebody from our office up in the DC area facilitating the conversation. And so the conversation may be based upon PTSD. It may be based upon, you know, regaining the romance in the relationship, you know, whatever the conversation is. But like I said, it's driven by the caregiver. And so we've seen success, and to date, it is our longest running actual resource in office.
I think that's one of the things that really I came away with from the presentation, Dexter, is how much you individualize your support for the caregivers. So really paying attention to their specific needs and gearing your support and resources to those specific needs, to include, it looks like a lot of that like comes from them. You aren't guessing, you are listening, you're hearing what they need and structuring things specific to them. So that in itself is very unique and wonderful.
Definitely, and that's one of the highs that comes with this role. You know, at the end of the day, the caregiver is a vital component of the overall continuum of care for the service member. You know, if we and rightfully so, we put towards a lot of effort towards the service member getting back to some semblance of normalcy. But think about the home life, you know, the person who's there for them, the person who's going to help them even as they transition. If that person is not okay, that only becomes another issue that service member has to deal with at some point in time. And so let's help the caregiver to be in their best position so that the whole family can successfully make the transition and successfully heal.
Well said. Well said, sir. If no one has any other questions, last call, anybody have any further questions? I think that is a great note to wrap up on. Thank you all for joining. Thank you again, Dexter, for taking the time to be here with us today.
Thanks for having me.
And that concludes our Caregiver Coffee Hour.